Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 32 brought to you by Black Belt Magazine. And today I am honored to have two very special guests. We have Mr. Mike and Mr. John Palitti. And today we are going to be talking about a variety of topics from sport karate history to their tournament, the Toronto International Tournament of Martial Arts Champions, which is going virtual for 2020. So we're going to be getting into a lot of really exciting topics today. And I'm very, very pleased and honored to have these two on the show. And gentlemen, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourselves a little bit.
Very good, very good. I'm Michael Palitti. I'm the promoter of the Toronto Tournament of Champions, usually held in December, but with these times we've gone virtual. So we're actually going to October 9th and 10th this year, and we'll be running our event through the Juventix website portal, and we'll be offering a lot of the NASCA forms categories. You can visit the site, of course, and get the whole update on that. And we have a couple of interesting things that we're going to offer this year as well. I've been running Team NMAC for about 20 years now. Also our inter-school team as well. And we're running our school dojo, North Toronto Karate School, for also 30 years as well. So we have a lot of things going on, and basically that's but John, this is John Palitti here. I'll let him talk.
Still most of my signed up for the tournament. Yeah, but I'm John Palitti. I've been in martial arts for quite some time now, and I run the schools as well for my brother, and also co-promote with him for the tournament as well too. So we've been in the business for quite a while. We got some background stories, but we'll go through it with the episode.
Absolutely. A lot of the viewers might notice that it will be a little bit awkward for me because I typically refer to each of you as Mr. Palitti. For the audience that doesn't know, these guys donate a lot of their time judging at martial arts tournaments, which really helps our sport continue to progress because they know what they're looking at, and they do a great job of helping. Not only they host a great tournament themselves, but they do a great job of helping other tournaments run by centering rings, things like that. And I can't refer to them as Mr. Palitti because they're both Mr. Palitti. So you'll hear me awkwardly say Mike and John here and there. But anyway, so one of the things that, just to introduce our audience to you guys a little bit more, why don't you both go through kind of your story in the martial arts? I know back in the day, you guys were both competitors, have still been active competitors. I've seen you guys in the senior divisions as well, running some forms here and there. So just take us through your initial start in martial arts, kind of going up through your competitive years, and now being a promoter of a tournament, a coach, a school owner. Just go ahead and go through that experience for the both of you.
Sure, I'll let you go first since you started before me.
Oh yeah, it's been a few years anyway. Yeah, I started back in the 80s, way back when NASCA actually first started. There's many names that came before me, obviously, but the sport karate was much different back then. A lot of good fighters, a lot of good kind of competitors too, but the quality is now compared to then, it's so much better now. But it's evolved in my time, it's evolved majorly in the last 30 years. The fighters back then were something else. I know it's a little hard now because they're scattered all over the place, the fighters, but they were more unified back then, and there were so many good fighters. So I really enjoyed growing up to watching these guys. As a young kid, as an 18, 19-year-old, I was competing in NASCA as a brown belt in the black belt divisions. We were allowed to do it back then. So I learned so much back then, just growing up in that era, and just watching people like, from Vitali to Anderson, it was a joy. But even now, there's so many good kids now that it's improved quite a bit, and it's evolved quite a bit.
Very cool.
Well, I've also been involved with NASCA, I think, right from the get-go. I believe NASCA started in 83 or 84. Actually, our first instructor, Cesar Burkowski, was the first president of the NASCA, and also a competitor. Before NASCA, some of us know, some of us don't, SKI, Sport Karate Illustrated, was the sort of tour. They really ranked competitors, and it wasn't like today where you had a million divisions. It was pretty much weapons, forms, and maybe a couple of divisions of fighting. And it was men and women together. So for you to be on that, 10-person list or even 20-person list, it was a major thing. And if you went down that lineup, today you'd be like, wow, it's incredible. Just the legends that you see in that list was remarkable. I came in the mid 80s. I started as a underbelt in the NASCA categories. I had the luxury of seeing a lot of the older black belts. When I say older, older than me, competing and watching the evolvement of NASCA happening as it grew with myself. And again, like John said, we were allowed to compete as brown belts and black belt divisions. As a junior black belt, which was a brown advance, I actually moved up to the black belt category. And I remember that, we'll go into storytelling. I remember my first black belt fighting division was actually the US Open in Daytona. No, sorry, not Daytona. It was a Daytona or Orlando. It was Orlando in Kissimmee. So the venue was downtown. Yeah, I was in Daytona as well, but the first time was Orlando before they moved to Daytona. I fought as a junior black belt. So at that time, they had a couple of teams. One of the teams fell short. They came to ask me to fight on the Smash team, I believe it was. And I said, sure, why not? And I was just thrown into a kickboxing ring and said, okay, there you go, fight the #1 guy. So that was my initiation, I guess, for NASCA black belts. So it was a good time. I had a great experience. I loved it. I remember competing in the weapons division that year. So I was competing brown belts in the daytime, but thrown in the black belt division for fighting for just the special night show. And I remember that I think Fame was the circuit that was around Florida at that time, and it was huge. And it's gone through some changes, I'm sure, the names. But our division, there was like 50 people, and you just looked around the ring, and it was incredible. And it was funny because there was only about 2 or 3 of us that had bows, and 2 of us were from Canada. And the ones that had the staff down in Florida were, I think, traditional wushu stylists. So there wasn't a lot of bow back then. But in Canada, a lot of people did bow. So we had a lot of bow presence. And so it was good to see that we would come down there and represent with the bow staff. And mentioning Cesar Burkowski, he was one of the first bow staff competitors, and also Patrick McCarthy, to come out on the scene and, compete in the bow staff. So it kind of all started from there. Then, John was there, myself, Jeff Liotta, Rich Fukumoto. We all started coming out of the scene, competing, bringing the bow. Jeff Liotta was a multi 30-plus NASCA senior champion. And, it was evolving quite nicely with the bow staff. And we would go to the Diamond Nationals, for example. You'd have 30, 40 weapons competitors, and the 7 or 8 bow competitors were all from Canada. So I remember that one year, I think it was 1989, and we were all on stage, and from 1st to 6th was all bow staff people. We were all from Canada. And then everybody else to 30th place were pretty much all different weapons. But it was great to see that Canada was being represented so well. And, Mike Bernardo won that category that year. He's a, multi-champion diamond winner as well. And, but the bow just kept evolving with John doing lots of seminars back then. I remember him lugging, 100, 200 bows to tournaments. And people just be running up, grabbing their bows, and he'd be doing seminars. And I remember him telling me how about he introduced the first bow weaponry bow staff kata to Mr. Larry Carnahan's school. And he did a bow seminar for them. He could tell you more about that. But it was, again, I go to Diamonds every year, and every year his students come up and I see the kata that John taught them, Suishin Okan. So it hasn't changed. It's exactly the same. And Larry has kept it as their first bow form. And, I go there and I see it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. You get to see something. It's kind of like it's history now. It's embedded. But, we got to remember bow staff back then was different. It was very traditional. even more so traditional than our NASCA traditional weapons division now. But it started evolving even then and back in the 80s. Then Mike Bernardo came along, who brought in a lot of open movements. And, just from there, it exploded. You had Lauren Kearney, and you just go down the list. Like, everybody just started learning from everybody. And, right through to Becca Ross, and then our generation now, yourself. So you can just, if you backtrack everybody's lineage, it all goes back to one spot, and a lot of people learned from people that learned from the ones before. So, we've kind of sort of created our own North American style of caboodle, and it's nice to see, but we can track back our lineage to where we all started. So NASCA, again, going with that, has changed so much. I mean, we have to remember there was only so many categories to compete in. We were all together in one category. There was no bladed. There was no non-bladed. It was men, women. The men and women finally got separated in the later 80s. But again, there wasn't as many categories. I remember fighting diamonds that year as well. I think there was only, 2 or 3 fighting categories? Yeah, 4 or 5. But I remember I was in the middleweights, and we had about 50 fighting competitors. So, I mean, we do see that now too. But I mean, you're talking about 5 categories stacked, and the fighting was just phenomenal. But again, through the 80s, the 90s, and and now in the 2000s, things have come along quite a way. But it's good to see some of the old faces still coming out. One of your co-team members there, Rocky DeRico, I think he's been around for a very long time, couple years. Brian Fung also been around for quite a long time, since the 70s. It's nice to see that they come out every so often and join us on the tour. But, there's a lot of history there. And Terry Kramer, of course, absolutely. He's also been on the scene. Maybe you can give us some other names.
But the bowl itself, it was pretty fun back then, because when we first introduced the bowl and when I started bringing it down there, nobody really did weapons bowl down there. Obviously, it was mostly sword, kamas, tonfas, and stuff like that. But the bowl itself, I had a blast down there. And at the time, I was selling a lot of bowls down there, but I was also teaching quite a bit of bowl seminars. One of my funnest ones, actually, we went to the U.S. Open one year, which was on Daytona Beach, and we just started practicing on the beach. Then all of a sudden, we went from 4 people to 6 people to 10. Now all of a sudden, I was teaching 30 to 40 people on the beach, and we just stood there for hours, and I didn't care. We tried to spread it out as much as possible, and we just had a blast, and the bowl just exploded from then. Right. And yeah, it was fun. It was a good times.
That's really cool. A lot of current day sport karate competitors and fans don't realize is how deep, especially within Bo, that sport karate pedigree runs in Canada. Like, even my lineage, who I was trained by an American, Lauren Kearney, but my lineage goes all the way back to Mike Bernardo, like you mentioned.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Bow staff athlete. Even Casey Marks, who many would consider to be the greatest female bow staff competitor of all time, he was born in America, moved to Canada when she married Trevor Nash, right?
Yeah.
Canada just has this deep history of excellence in sport karate, but specifically excellence in bow. I still remember 2008 WKA World Championships. I believe that organization has now kind of been transferred over to WKU. Yeah. But when I competed in WKA the first time in 2008, it was down in Orlando. And I remember I made it to the finals, and it was me and 3 Canadians was the finals for weapons. 2 of them did bow, 1 of them did sword. Yeah. The defending champion was Charles Olivier Dubé, who had been undefeated for 2 or 3 years. And it had only been 4 Canadians in the finals for 5, 6, 7 years, right? Yeah. So the fact that an American was making it to the finals, even as recently as 2008, was a big deal when I was in the junior division. So that was kind of a really cool, and that was kind of the moment where I realized how deep the sport karate roots in Canada were. And you mentioned other sport karate legends, your instructor, Steve Kowski, Steve Nasty Anderson, of course, was a Canadian. Rest in peace to him.
He was American. He came to Canada. Yeah, but Steve was American, and he moved to Canada.
Oh, okay, interesting. We'll see. I learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, he moved to he came to Toronto for a seminar. He loved it and he never left. And he moved to Ottawa after that. But Steve was a great guy. He actually he was doing a lot of stuff in Toronto because God bless him. He was supporting fight diabetes with Mr. Wong, which is a part of John Park's school. John Park, I don't know if you know who he is, but very famous Taekwondo practitioner here in Canada. Arlene Lemus, a lot of people did a lot of, Billy Blanks, they did training with him a little bit to get into the Olympics and whatnot. So Mr. Wong and his wife, they had this big cause for Karate Fights Diabetes. And Steve was so great. He came, I remember, he did a sparathon. And the man fought from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And I'm talking with limited breaks. It was phenomenal. He did so much for the cause. And, you know, again, he was a great guy. Speaking of WKA, when you, I think this was just before you, because you were in, I think, Florida or maybe something like that. Where did you compete for WKA?
My first one was 2008 in Orlando.
Orlando. So just before Florida, I remember that, you know, they always want more American judging presence. And, you know, there's only so many people that you could choose for weapons or kata. And they got Steve to come in and judge weapons. Everybody was just amazed, like, Steve's judging weapons, and this is crazy. And he was fantastic. He's very knowledgeable. I mean, he did the whole night show and finals, and you know, and I remember him talking to me after I performed, and you know, he's like, man, he goes, you know, he always had something good to say. He was a good guy, and very impressive, very knowledgeable. So yeah, so Steve's got a lot of roots moving from the U.S. to Canada, and then supporting all sorts of causes for us all.
Absolutely. So now shifting off of sport karate history, which we're absolutely going to come back to.
Sure.
I also wanted to mention kind of some of the breaking news over the past couple of weeks. NASCA recently released their COVID-19 guidelines for the tournaments that are still going to be happening. You guys made the decision, especially with a lot of the international travel restrictions, to make the Toronto Tournament of Champions virtual this year. But you guys are doing something really unique with that. I hear that you're going to be continuing to host the seminars that have really made your tournament famous within the sport karate community. For our viewers that don't know, because not all of our viewers are sport karate viewers,
sure.
All of our viewers that may not know, one of the things that these guys have done with their tournament is they offer free seminars that come with your registration to the event, and just an absolutely incredible lineup of instructors. I've been very humbled to be included in that lineup for the past several years now. But I mean, Casey Nash has done seminars, Trevor Nash has done seminars, and I mean, there's a full list of world champions that have done seminars at their event, and that's free with your registration. And you guys are going to be continuing to do that on a virtual basis with the virtual event. So can you kind of tell our viewers what to expect from the virtual Toronto Tournament of Champions?
Absolutely. So, I mean, you know, we can actually bring more seminars going virtually, actually, which is great. We do have a list set already of instructors that'll be offering seminars that day. So traditionally what would happen is that we would run about 6 seminars at the same time on the hour. And typically the competitor who pre-registers can take any seminar they want. It's pretty much open. And everybody signs up for it, and they just choose the instructor they want to go to. And we typically do that for about 3 to 5 hours on the Friday for the seminar. So it's pretty much going to be the same type of thing. We don't have the schedule set yet. We're working on that. We're probably going to start at around 9 in the morning on Friday. And I'm thinking that it's probably going to run to about 4 o'clock in that general area, maybe a little bit longer, just depending on our list of instructors. But we have yourself, as you know, we have Jared Leiker, Julian Shimon, Anthony Demores, Robbie Lavoie, Nico Campagna. We also have Tommy Leduc from Montreal, and then our international or Central America representatives. So far we have Iker Moran, George Morales, Mariana Cortez, Paula Duque, Diana Hernandez, Juan Carlos Damon Ross, Juan Lopez Palacio, and from Guatemala, we have George Andre Palencia, which I think you know him from California and from Chicago. So he did a couple. He was going to do the whole season this year. He was all gung-ho, but yeah, he's going to be there as well. So we have a lot of representation. The list is not complete. We're still getting more instructors. As we just turned virtual, everything is just in process of signing up more instructors. So we will have a schedule ready. When you go to the Uventex and you sign up, we will implement either you sign up for the seminar, or we'll do that on a later date. You just come back and you pick your instructors. But you will have everything from kata to weapons to fighting. Anything you want to do is offered. And I think last year and the year before, we had about 400 of the competitors that competed. We had about 600, but 400 actually attended the seminars. So that's a big chunk that showed up for that. So and they're always successful. Your seminar is always great. Lots of kids. Jared's is always huge as well. We had Trevor Nash. We've had Ross Levine. Unfortunately, Ross, I think we have to speak with Ross this year because he's getting married. So we have to see if he's available. But we've had Ross every year. We love him, and we'd love for him to come back as well. But Robbie, all these instructors, their seminars are fantastic. And the kids look forward to it every year. It's the thing that's on their agenda. I never get so many great compliments from you guys. You guys do awesome. So that's what we're doing with the virtual. Virtual will run the same way, Friday, Saturday. We're looking to do a live show on the finals. So for the Saturday night, we're looking to do a finals. It may be selected divisions. Now we do got to remember we have competitors now competing from, this is the cool thing about virtual. We have now competitors competing from Kazakhstan, Japan, all sorts of places around the world. So to go live, it's going to be tricky because it'll be 3 a.m. for them. And so we're thinking about how we're going to do it. Do we allow them to do recorded videos if we're doing a nighttime show for us? So there's things up in the air to decide how we're going to run that. But this year, we're also going to throw in, as you know, we do a traditional challenge event for the last few years. And we've been hyping it up every year. Joey Castro's won it the couple of last 2 years. Melissa's won it, and so forth. So we want to actually change a little bit this year. And we thought, because we have so much international representation, this year, anybody who registers for a regular NASCA Trad Challenge is going to be put into a bracket with their own country. So we're going to have country representation. So anybody who is a registered competitor for any of the NASCA Trad divisions, from adults to kids, will be put in a bracket, their own age group, and their own country. And we're going to basically crown country champions. Then we're going to take all the champions, run them in their age category, and have country versus country. And we're going to come up with the winner of each category and have an international winner. Men's, women's, I think it's 15, 17, 13, 14, 12 and under. Then from there, we are all going to offer cash prizes to the adults overall. So it'll be men versus women's, 2 winners. And then the junior black belts, we're going to give a cash prize as well. And it's going to be basically, there's going to be, I think, 3 on each side, boys and girls. So you'll have a runoffs of those 6 going for the overall grands. And that's going to be our Trad Challenge for this year. So every year it gets bigger. We get more representation. We've had 6 countries, 7 countries every year. So I think this year, because of the virtual, we're going to surpass that, I'm sure. We're already at 6 countries. So I'm sure there'll be probably about 10 or 12.
That's very cool. Certainly, as a fan of the sport and as a competitor, that's one thing that I always appreciate about your event is you're always innovating, whether it's the seminars and offering those to the attendees, or now you're saying this newly adopted kind of traditional forms bracket going by country. I mean, these are the types of things that help the sport keep moving forward, because it takes somebody willing to try these new things in order to figure out what's going to work and what's going to be effective. And so I definitely have a lot of respect for you and your event for doing that. Now we're going to kind of go back into the history a little bit, and I want to stay specific to the Toronto Tournament of Champions.
Sure.
In all the years that you guys have been hosting the event, do you maybe each have a favorite memory, a favorite moment, something that was funny, something that was crazy, and you thought you were going to, lose your mind over it, right?
Sure.
Any crazy stories from through the years of running that event?
I'll give you the first grabs.
Well, to be honest, I've been to a lot of tournaments, but the seminar side of it, it's just unreal. Like walking into some of the rooms, and last year in your seminar, walking in and seeing 60 to 70 kids with bowls, flipping them around. I was busy fixing up the ring for you all the time. That was something else. Just to watch that many kids just zoned in on you and teaching them how to do bowl was pretty impressive. The year before, Jarrett was at our other hotel, and we usually broke it up in ring by ring for you guys for seminars, but we literally had to give him the whole place for a seminar because there was no space. And I think he had about 75 people doing trad in his room as well too. It's just insane because you don't see that through the years.
Right.
It's a first for me. I'm going to stick with the seminars. I think the funniest moment for me, as you know who Connell is. Connell's had you do seminars for him. Connell's from Michigan, so he's a big supporter of our event, and thank you, Connell. But, Connell arrived while the seminars had started at one of our older locations, and he walked in, and it was just priceless. And I think we were at the Hershey Center, and we were still not a world event. We were still a AAA. And Connell just was in awe. He just stopped and he goes, "This is amazing. I've never seen anything like this. This is incredible." He's like, "We got to take pictures, take lots of pictures. This is amazing. We got to show everybody." And I think that's what Connell got the bug for the seminar thing, and he thought this is fantastic. And he had no idea until he showed up. A lot of people don't, because it's not covered by any of the medias, so they don't know what to expect when they show up. And I'm just thinking, going back, how the seminars have grown. We've offered seminars from day number one. So 20 years ago, we had seminars. We started off with 2 instructors, and it just kept growing. And I remember that the first couple of years, it was kind of like, you can have this small room downstairs underneath the competition floor area. I mean, it's so hard to find, and it's like, you had maybe, 6 or 7 people show up for the seminar. That was day number one. And then you look at, 20 years later, and you have, 400 people on that floor, and some of them at the same time doing seminars. Is just phenomenal. For me to see that, it's something that I envisioned, and it happened, because I know what competitors want, because I consider myself still a competitor. We know what we like. We know what we want. We always want to learn. We want to learn from the best, but we also want to learn from the knowledgeable. And, there's so much knowledge out there. And it's great to see, because sometimes when I see some of you guys teaching, I see, new stuff, but then I see some stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, I know where that came from. I remember that. Like, I'll see somebody teaching in Mexico, and I'll be like, oh, Robbie Lavoie. And they're teaching Robbie Lavoie stuff. Oh, Raymond Daniels. Zoltmer. I can tell the drill. I can tell the routine. Everything has a signature. And this is the beauty of martial arts. Everything has a signature, and you can trace it back. I can trace back the Mike Bernardo roll, the bull roll from day one. When somebody's doing it, the arm roll, I know where they learned it from. And I can give the whole breakdown of who came before them. And that's martial. That's how we got these styles. They all have their signature movements because of the founder, so to speak. So it's good to see. I mean, because we got to keep this going because, I mean, back in the day, they didn't have videos. They barely had any books. Everything was by memory. So they needed to pass on the knowledge. And we need to keep that. It can't just be video. There's got to be knowledge from person to person as well, not just YouTube, obviously. So it's good to see the interaction. And we've actually, and with all this virtual stuff going on now, it's kind of coming all around because, believe it or not, we used to do virtual before, not in this fashion, but it used to happen different ways in the older days, but it would happen. I mean, you know, it's harder to do live stuff, but sometimes you had to record it, then send it. But, you know, it was virtually because that was virtual then, you know. It wasn't that easy. I remember our events going back 1989, honestly, in Canada anyways, was one of the first televised tournaments, which was my instructor, Cesar Burkowski, and sorry? No. It was he was co-hosted with somebody else. I think it was Alex Atkinson. Alex Atkinson and Cesar Burkowski. They had one of the major TV hubs here called Rogers. They basically run all the sports now anyways, but they were like they were doing local broadcasts, whatnot, and they showed up to the tournament and they broadcasted it. It was actually really, really cool. And we actually got to compete live. That was the first time we got to compete live. A lot of stuff was always pre-recorded, but a lot of the stuff was live and pre-recorded as well. But we're talking about 1989. It was something different back then, and it was great. So, you know, it's good to see the involvement of everything, and we're all learning from those experiences and try to share that with everybody else. But that's the seminar side. The competition side, there's just so many things I could look back on. I mean, Danny, you compete. I remember Danny. You know what? Speaking of Danny, I have to mention this because the kid's great. One year I asked Danny to compete. And Danny, sure, why not? So we put him in. I think John was there because John was laughing. We put Danny in, I think, 7 categories, and he maybe more. And he literally did a form one after the other. And I'm not kidding. I think he had a 30-second to 1-minute break between each form. And he competed about 7 times in a row. And it was the funniest thing. He won, don't get me wrong. But he was so spent. I mean, the kid was phenomenal. And this is when Danny was a little bit younger. And he did fantastic. But it was like, I don't know. I mean, the endurance was incredible. But I never seen somebody do 7 forms in a row. That was just something else for me. And I thought that was so cool. And, you know, there's so many. I mean, sometimes the smaller events, you have more memories because it's more intimate. But that would have been one of my more comical ones. I remember at Hershey one year, we had about 600 to 700 competitors, and the facility was just jam-packed, and it was just shoulder to shoulder, and it was just something that for us was phenomenal. We weren't a world event. We had the head-to-head. We started that head-to-head division for the traditional challenge and open back in those days, and you needed to do a form, just like fighting. You needed to do a form every win. So that's where Danny did his 7 cutters in a row, I think just for the bracket alone. And yeah, that's basically, you got to be ready. Boom, you win, you go to the next one. And it's open season. You can do any form you want. And it was nice. But the kids coming in and just looking around and seeing people from, we had people from Indonesia that year, Mongolia, and it was just fantastic. There was so many representation, a lot of great competitors, and you know that would probably be one of my more memorable memories for the tournament.
Absolutely. And that's an accomplishment to be not a world rated event with any sanctioning league, but still be able to attract that many competitors, a testament to the quality of the event for sure. And then another point that you mentioned, kind of 2 points here that I think are really important. I remember there was a Facebook discussion, I forget who posted it, relatively recently about in the past decade or 2 decades, what has been the number one thing that's contributed to the growth of sport karate. And I think that definitely the two things that have contributed the most are enhanced media coverage through ESPN. Sportmartialarts.com does an incredible job. Here on Black Belt Magazine, we're starting to cover more and more breaking news within sport karate and documenting some of the history. So the media has improved, which is helping, like I said, document that history and also make sure that sport karate fans know about what's going on in the sport, know who the athletes are, know who the teams are. And in addition to that, the second point is the increase in the prevalence and the attendance of seminars. You know, back in the day, like you were saying, seminars were often attached to tournaments. Sometimes people would do small seminar tours, things like that, where they would have huge seminars, but they were relatively isolated events. And that was one thing that I was very blessed with the opportunity to have when I was growing up in the sport, 14, 15, 16 years old. That's when martial arts schools really started hiring those 16, 17-year-old champions regularly to travel across the country and do seminars here and do seminars there. Hyper Martial Arts did a whole lot of work with kind of kickstarting that revolution and making seminars something that was a lot more popular for competitors of all ages. And just the increase in the seminars and the private training to help students get specialized instruction, that is something that has really helped the quality and the quantity of competitors increase over the past decade. And it starts with the precedent that people like you and all of your contemporaries set by teaching those seminars, like John said, you know, just being out on the beach and not even doing an official seminar, just enjoying teaching 30 or 40 people how to do some of those techniques. That's really cool. Now I want to shift to, we're still going to be taking a trip down memory lane, but instead of your careers as promoters, let's shift over to your careers as competitors. Do you have any career highlights you wanted to share? Maybe a point fighting match against somebody cool or anything like that?
Sure. Before we go into that, this is still going down memory lane, you brought something to memory. When John and I were in Daytona for the U.S. Open, so the U.S. Open used to take place in Daytona for a little bit. So we got the privilege of staying on the beach strip there. And it was John, myself, my sister. There was, who was the guy from New York? He was there with his Corvette on the beach. He's from Chicago, sorry. I'm sorry, I apologize. The name slips me. He was there. Armando, yes. And there was a few others. So we decided, it wasn't like, it was just, hey, let's go practice. So we all went on the beach and we brought our weapons. And and these guys are like, you got to teach us the bow. You got to teach us the bow to my brother. So, and this guy was a fighter or whatever. So we decided to go on the beach and do bow staff. And you've been to Daytona, I'm sure. And there's a lot of people walking by and you can drive your cars there, whatever else. But we were practicing, and before you knew it, I mean, I think we were 20 minutes in and we were just so focused on working out and practicing. We didn't really pay attention to what was around. But when we stopped at one point, we looked around and there was about 200, 300 people in a huge circle around us watching. And we were like, wow. And I mean, it was kind of like a seminar, but it really wasn't. I mean, that was probably like one of the first times that, hey, this is a great idea, you know? And, you know, but the experience was, you know, memorable because you got to do it with friends and you look back and, you know, that was a great time. But I'll let John take over for maybe, he's told me about so many fights. A memorable moment when you used to compete.
There's so many different fights. Actually, for me, the best fighters weren't the memorable ones. It was the guys that you didn't expect to fight. Like, again, I saw back in the 80s when George Jung and Stuart Kwan and all these other guys were competing at the time. These guys were all kata guys. Caesar ran a tournament. He ran the Cavalry Crunchies back in the 80s. My brother remembers the date better than I do.
1984, 85.
Yeah. But that was the first year he brought everybody up. So all these guys, and there was a lot of money involved. And Cavalry sponsored the tournament, so there was a ton of money. And I stepped into the ring. I was with Tangston and a bunch of other guys. But my first fight, Keith Hirabayashi steps in the ring. And you would never think this guy was a fighter, right? And Stuart Kwan was fighting, George Chung was fighting, all these kind of guys that never fought, put on the gloves and started fighting. And I'm going to tell you, they can fight. They were pretty good. They can fight. So those fights to me were actually more special. I fought so many different fights. My toughest fights were South Americans. They were the toughest fights. And it was unfortunate because many of them couldn't compete in the States. There were so many good lightweight and super lightweight fighters and even middleweight fighters down there that they never came up to compete. But my toughest competition easily was back then was down there. NASCAR tournaments, my toughest always was probably Tony Young. We've gone back and forth many times. He's got my number, man. And, but other than him, it was pretty fun. Like I've competed quite a bit in Europe and all over North America as well too. But my funnest fights were always down south, always, because my best competition was always down there.
My most memorable moment of me watching him fight was him fighting Gabe Renaga.
Oh yeah, me and Renaga had a pretty good fight in California.
I was like well, John was always a fighter, but it was like in people's eyes, two trad cut guys fighting each other. And Gabe's a good fighter. He's a great fighter. But watching the both of them go at it, the fight, it seemed like it lasted 20 minutes. It was just back and forward, back and forward, back and forward. There was a little bit of blood, but But the guys were, I was like that. It was entertaining, a great fight. I mean, that's what one of the fights I remember him fighting in the NASCAR division.
Very cool.
Any other things?
Fight. Everybody knows me as a kind of weapon guy, but I used to fight quite a bit, and I used to win quite a bit in weapons and fighting as well too. But I had more fun fighting than I had doing cutting weapons easily. But I was push myself to do all three, and not just to compete in one circuit, but to compete as many as possible. I wasn't stuck to NASCAR. I wasn't stuck to NBL. I did NASCAR for a few years. I did NBL for a few years. I competed in many different places. Then I started doing match fights in Europe, which were really fun. And then the Team Canada fights are really fun when we used to travel to Europe. Those are really, really fun because we had a taste of going to different countries. I liked it. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that more than anything else. But even up to today, I still push competitors to compete at as many circuits as possible and spread your wings. Go and compete as much as you can out there. You only get better.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Sorry, I don't want to step in.
Interesting point. You mentioned fighting over in Hey, one thing that I was curious about is one thing that a lot of people notice in modern sport karate competition is we have great fighters in North America and we have great fighters over in Europe, but they tend to be rather differently stylistically because of the European WACO rules versus the more American NASCAR rules. Fighters like Zolt Marati, all the Hungarians, Roman Rundle from Europe, Elijah Averill, compared to your Raymond Daniels and your Ross Levine and such from North America. So back then, was there a big style difference that you noticed, like a lot of competitors would say there is now, or would you say it was more similar back then?
It was kind of similar. It's different but similar because back then you can say, well, it was completely different, but back then the style was very similar because it was hard. Everything was hard, hit hard, point hard. Like you weren't getting points for touches to the shoulders. You had to hit to score points. So it was very, very hard. And I personally, I've competed in Taekwondo tournaments and karate tournaments and traditional tournaments, and it was different back then. The Taekwondo tournaments were really, really wide open back then. We used to fight 7, 8, 9 fights just to get into the top 3. They were pretty big size tournaments. And point fighting in Europe was huge back in the 80s and 90s, like spectator-wise. Oh, yeah. I went to a Taekwondo tournament one time in Germany, and there must have been probably 10,000 spectators watching point fighting. It was pretty impressive. And I walked in just in awe because I couldn't believe how many countries showed up and how many people showed up just to fight point. And there was good prize money. It was different. The fighters there were completely different than the fighters here, but a point was a point. There was a lot of good fighters out of Europe, even back then compared to now. And it's almost the same. If you want to compare them, it's almost the same comparing fighters now from North America to Europe compared to then fighting North America to Europe. So it's similar.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, even with the kata and weapons, like I said, there has been I mean, we got to remember traditional weapons then were different than traditional weapons now. Because what we have now, we didn't have then. So open and traditional back then was completely different. I mean, so I noticed over the years, we just keep adding more open divisions, if you will, to, you know, because things are just getting more intense, if you will. And so you got to add those extra categories. I think one year Charlie Lee had to sit down and make rules for these categories because guys were coming in tricking and whatever else, and you couldn't really have that in the same division with other stylists because it's like apples and oranges. So it was great that Charlie did that, and you know, we still use his rules today. They've been you know, edited a little bit because he got to when the times have changed, but you know, trad kata is trad kata. I mean, it doesn't actually. In the last, I think, 10 years, I've seen a big push on trad kata in the NASCA world. Before, it wasn't so much. I mean, you have your NASCA traditional division, but traditional movement. So it could mean any modern type style. So you know, I respect it, of course, but it's still not bringing the essence of the, you know, the Japanese system. Now, because of a lot of people, they've been really bringing that back. And I mean, I remember competing with Nipai Po, which is a Shida-Ryu form, back in the mid, like probably 2004 or 5. I was the only person presenting this form. And everybody was doing the same, you know, the Gopai show or whatever. It was always the same cut as you see. But it's kind of interesting because every year there's the kata of the year that everybody does. It just seems to be like that. There's, you know, those couple of katas that everybody does. And it's the in kata for that year. So you see the movement every year. And that's just because people are learning more forms. People are getting out there and learn with these seminars, they're learning to do other kata forms, which is great because it brings more knowledge. It brings more competitors to these traditional divisions. And, you know, people like Jared and Keith Weston and so many. I mean, Joey Castro, Ariel, I can keep going down the list. So many of them have brought seminars and their katas to the kids, because I always see the kids learning and they're just passing it on. So the divisions are getting bigger. So I noticed a big change with the trad divisions, and they're actually getting bigger and going backwards where we used to be like this. So it's nice to see that in the kata stuff.
I've got an interesting question for you regarding what you said about traditional weapons and about how now you go and you watch a NASCA tournament, traditional weapons, because of the speed and the pacing and the performance that's added to it. Traditional weapons now is really what open weapons would have been back in the day. You go and watch a open weapons form, it was traditional weapons on NASCA today. So this is what I was talking about with Mike Welch a couple of episodes ago. What if, because like in NASCA traditional forms, right? We have traditional challenge where it's only the WKF approved, a very specific list of forms that you can run. But then you have the regular Japanese forms division where, you know, if it was a Will Cornell style or a Scott Wu style or a John Su, those like 2000s era NASCA style forms that were a little bit more performance oriented, as opposed to the true traditional form, you can do those in the Japanese division. What would be your take on having a similar system in traditional weapons, where there was a traditional weapons challenge that was featuring Kabuto weapons forms, true traditional weapons forms, and then the traditional weapons division, as it remains right now, would stay largely the same with the increased speed? What's your take on something like that?
I agree. I think it's a good idea. Actually, Amerikick does it. They've got a traditional weapons challenge. I mean, there wasn't a lot of people that showed up, but they had it. Again, we got to start somewhere, but it's got to be an authentic form. It's a little bit harder when it comes to the Kabuto side because they don't have as many forms as they do in kata. So it's hard to uniform and say, this is the list of forms that you can do, because not everybody knows those forms. It's not as widespread as the traditional kata. Like everybody knows Kankusho. Everybody knows, you know, Unsu. It's so much easier, and they go from style to style. Now, we got to remember, in Kabuto, not every style covers traditional kabuto. You know, goju, you know, a little bit in shidoru. It just depends on the branch and the system if they have the weaponry in their system. So it's a little tougher. It's a little more challenging, but I believe Amerikick already has it. And they have some rules for it. And they asked me to do it, which I was open to do it. And I think there was I asked around, and we had about 5 or 6 people that were interested. Now, the funny thing is, the people that wanted to do it were all over 30 years old because they know the traditional form. So, you know, I remember Don Weidman, sure, I'm in. You know, like all the older guys are in it, no problem, because a lot of them are competing with those forms already in the 30, 40, 50 plus divisions. And a lot of these guys do know traditional weapons if they want to do them, of course. A lot of us, you know, tweak our forms, if you will, when we do them in the open divisions. So I think if it's offered, people will come, you know.
The quality is there for these kids. I watch a lot of these kids in tournaments, and I'm sure you see them all the time too. But they're so good, and even if they would have to adapt their form to more traditional, they would be able to do it in a heartbeat. And it's just that the quality of these kids is pretty phenomenal right now. So I can see kids adapting very, very easily to the traditional weapon division.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's most kids' first introduction to weapons is when they're in their traditional martial arts program at their school, and then they get introduced to one of those traditional forms. Typically, in my experience, it is just one of those forms because, like you mentioned, there's not very many of them. Yeah. So a lot of schools have like one of them in their program when you get to red belt or brown belt or something like that. But still, that's a lot of people's first introduction to weapons. Yep. Go ahead. I thought you wanted to say something, Mike.
No, that's. I know my brother brought up the Carnahan thing before, but that's exactly what I did with Carnahan. He's a Taekwondo school, and to go in there to teach a brand new program, especially a weapon program, to a bunch of people that primarily fight. I know Taekwondo has their own forms as well too, but they never done weapons. So basically, going in there teaching them a basic traditional weapon form, and base out his whole program on a regular traditional weapon. And even up to today, he's got multiple forms now, but he's got his basics form that he hasn't changed, and he forces kids to learn right from the beginning. And we do the same thing with our students as well too. They gotta learn trad before they can do anything open. And I'm sure many other schools do the same thing as well too. But yeah, it's where should we start from?
I think this could be done. It's a project. I think if we put time into it, my suggestion is simple. We need 4 or 5 heads come together, the knowledgeable ones, the ones that know the forms. I personally would record all those forms, put them on a website and say, these are the forms that you can do in traditional Kabuto challenge. The kids can learn the forms through the website or an instructor of their choice who know those forms, and then just take it from there. And then every year you can just keep adding forms to it. We got to start somewhere. I think that's where I would start with it, because typically like Suishi no Kan, Sakagawa no Kan, these are 2 main bow forms a lot of people know. But we got to add to it. It can't just be 2 forms, you know? And that's just for the bow. Like we're still talking sai, tonfa, kama. There's all those other weapons too. I mean, you're going to have people that say nunchucks are traditional and whatever else. So we have to decide, is it Japanese, you know, style weaponry only, sword, whatever? Is it non-bladed, bladed? All these things have to come together. Ore is a big weapon these days. A lot of people like to use ore. So we have to, you know, set the building formation, and I think it's possible. We can do it.
Absolutely. And for anybody that's interested in studying Kabuto weapons, things like that, if you're watching here on the Black Belt Magazine page, you head over to the shop portion of the Black Belt Magazine website. We actually recently updated the website with some really cool curricular courses that you can check out there. And there is a Fumio Demura Kabuto weapons course featuring Ikubo, bow, tonfa, sai, nunchaku, kamas as well. So you can check out all of those different weapons through that program. I think it's relatively cheap. I think it's like $40 for the entire program.
Yes.
Karate legend Fumio Demura, who was a pioneer of karate in the United States. So
absolutely,
check that out if we've sparked your interest here for all of our viewers in Kabuto weapons. And now the last little topic that I wanted to get to is the t-shirt that you're wearing, Team NMAC. This is you've been running for a long time. And one of the things that's most impressive about it, and that as a competitor I really appreciate, is the size of your team. You support a lot of different competitors. I believe that you are the largest professional team in sport karate right now. I don't know what the exact number is, but just talk a little bit about your motivation for starting the team and why you continue it, and what is the mission of Team Inman.
All right. Well, I mean, it started about 20 years ago. We started off with 2 people. It kind of started, back in 2000, we formed a local group, and we started promoting local athletes. And, there's a lot of kids out there that don't go to international competition. And you gotta build a foundation. So the whole idea was, hey, you know what? Let's get these local athletes that don't compete as much, that don't go to many tournaments, and start creating a little circle. Because I started that way with my old instructor. They had a team Cadbury Country. There's all these different little teams that we had, and it was great because it gave the kids something to work for, motivation, and and also. The team wasn't just about, shining the best, but the potential of being the best too. So we kind of started there, and we started locally. I'm from Toronto, so we started around the Toronto area. And then from there, we started going regionally, where we started going provincially. We started picking up competitors from different schools. And then, from there, it went national. And then we started bringing it into the U.S. side a little bit. But as the U.S. has so many teams, I thought, you know what? They have got so many teams. They're helping a lot of kids already. Why don't we take this one step further? Why don't we start doing international? At that time, I mean, I could really count on one hand. Pablo Moreno and a couple of others were only competing from Mexico. You had Tony Hosami. I mean, you had the few. But I'm talking about residents that were living outside of the U.S. that don't have those opportunities to come to NASCAR tournaments as much. And I thought, you know what, let's get some international faces. And the first person from Mexico we put on was, I actually spotted her at the Quebec Open. And she was competing at the Quebec Open, fantastic kata, Terry Barroso. We put her on the team. So that started our international presence there. And when I went down to do classes with her, and I went to pretty much recruit competitors. When I showed up there, I was in awe. I could not believe you've been there, Jackson. I could not believe the talent. It was amazing. And I'm not just talking fighting, kata, weapons, everything. Just phenomenal. So it was kind of like, okay, where do I start? One of our first team members was Paula Duque, who's competing now actively, Lily Roboles, Mariana Cortez, and one of our other 2 first members was Melissa Martinez and David Martinez. Melissa's the champion for the MMA in the Combat Americas, which is just almost like the UFC. And she's undefeated. She's a fantastic fighter. But these are the type of, there's so many to pick from. It's like you can't pick them all, but they're all equally great, So, and then from there we went from Guatemala, we have Honduras, we now have Dubai and Italy. So we try to expand it out to as many countries as possible, and and bring in these athletes that don't have the opportunity. So for us, it's just a team. You know what? In Mexico, it's not just a team. It's something better than that. It's a privilege. It means something. When they announce it, everybody in Mexico knows it's a big thing. So all these people that are representing all the different teams here in the NASCAR world from the South America, Central America, it's a big deal. So that's how we started. What kept us going. And I believe right now we have about 70 to 75 active competitors. With retired competitors and coaches, we probably have about 130. So, it's just like your team, JPM. Once you're a member, you're always a member, and you're alumni. So I always tell that, because our kids got to go to university, you know, and, you know, coach, you know, I'm sorry, but I got to go to university. That's okay. You know what? Hey, you're still on the team. Whenever you're able to come and support us or whatever, hey, you're still part of the family, you know? So that's the whole objective of having the team. And, you know, we support them and we encourage them to go to the tournaments they can go to.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And thank you both so much for all the great work that you've done for our sport, that you've done from NASCA. You mentioned also competing on NBL. And ultimately, you know, I think that we all hope for one day when everybody can put their heads together and create one kind of unified league. And I think that a lot of the things that we're doing right now are taking steps in the right direction to achieve that. And you guys are leading the charge with your innovation at your own event, and then supporting all the other events that you guys go to. And again, as a competitor, I greatly appreciate that. And I know there's a lot of others that appreciate it too. So thank you both so much for your time. Any closing comments before we wrap up here?
Well, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. I think what you're doing, Jackson, is awesome. You know, I always message you and tell you you're doing a great thing for us all. You know, like you're a big role model for the kids. They look up to you. And but John says it all the time.
It's hard to say. We keep hearing the perspective from the instructors all the time when it comes to seminars, but we get a lot of feedback. We get a lot of kids in the seminars. Like my brother said, it was 400 of them last year. And the amount of compliments we get on the instructors is endless. Like guys from you to Ross, to all these guys that do these seminars, to Jared, we get so many compliments from you guys. And it's them asking us to get you guys to come back all the time because we're getting constant compliments from all the instructors, which is, we can't even thank you guys enough on that stuff.
And you know, and the same thing, like, you know, they compliment. It's not just how good you are, it's they're complimenting you on, you know, your whole aura, how you teach, how you talk to the children, even the adults. It's just the whole representation. And yourself, Jared, Ross, Trevor, all you guys are phenomenal. And you know, that is, you know, what I want to say is thanks for doing what you're doing. Keep up the great work. And we're thankful for what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the kind words. Thank you to all of our viewers that have tuned in today. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and drop those down in the comments below. Thank you to Black Belt Magazine for sponsoring and supporting the podcast. This has been episode 32, and I'll see you guys next time.
Hey guys.
Good night.